The Zorath's first strike came without warning. Earth's advanced monitoring systems, designed to detect asteroid impacts and satellite debris, failed to register the alien ships until it was too late. The fleet appeared in Earth's atmosphere like a swarm of locusts, massive, dark shapes blotting out the sun. For a brief moment, the world's inhabitants watched in awe, not knowing that they were about to witness the beginning of the end. The Zorath didn't announce their presence with speeches or demands. They simply attacked, and they attacked with precision. Energy beams rained down on Earth's major cities, each pulse powerful enough to decimate entire blocks. The largest cities, New York, Tokyo, London, fell in mere minutes, their iconic skylines reduced to rubble as the invaders displayed their dominance. The world's military forces scrambled, but they were no match for the Zorath's advanced weaponry. Missiles fired from Earth's defense systems exploded harmlessly against the alien ships, their shields absorbing each blow with impunity. Fighter jets launched in desperate attempts to intercept the invaders, but they were quickly shot down, their engines incinerated by high-energy plasma. The world's leaders, caught in the chaos, issued frantic orders, trying to coordinate a defense, but there was no time to respond. The Zorath had come too fast, too strong. Across the world, chaos spread. Governments collapsed under the pressure of the alien invasion, and citizens scattered in every direction, seeking shelter from the unrelenting assault. But no place was safe. In the face of such overwhelming firepower, panic gripped the hearts of billions. Yet in the midst of the destruction, something else began to happen. There were survivors, people who, though terrified, refused to simply give in. In the ruins of cities, groups of ordinary men and women began to gather. In underground bunkers and abandoned military installations, resistance leaders began to form. These were not soldiers by training, but they were fighters by nature. They understood that survival meant something more than hiding. They knew they had to act, no matter how small the effort. In a small secret bunker beneath a crumbled military base, General Abigail Kessler, once a rising star in the United Earth Command, stood among a ragtag group of survivors. Her face was a picture of resolve, even though she felt the weight of their situation bearing down on her. She looked around the room, meeting the eyes of the people who had come together in defiance of the Zorath. There were no more generals, no more organized armies, just ordinary people who had no choice but to fight. "We can't let them win," she said, her voice steady despite the uncertainty. "They'll tear this planet apart if we let them. We're not just fighting for survival. We're fighting for every person who's been taken, for every city that's burned. We're humanity, and we don't give up." A few faces in the room nodded, the resolve in their eyes mirroring her own. They weren't military experts, but they had a different kind of strength, an unyielding will to fight, to survive. As the initial shock of the invasion wore off, the first flickers of resistance ignited. Humanity had been caught off guard, but the fire to fight back had already begun to burn. The Zorath might have been the invaders, but Earth was about to prove that it was not an easy world to conquer. And so the resistance began, not with overwhelming force, but with a simple, powerful declaration: humanity would not kneel. The first sparks of defiance were lit, and the reckoning tide had begun. Days passed, and the world remained in disarray. Cities lay in ruin, and the alien invasion continued without mercy, as the Zorath expanded their control over the Earth's key locations. The survivors, scattered across the globe, had no formal chain of command. Yet, in the underground bunker where General Abigail Kessler had rallied the first resistance group, a spark of hope flickered. It came not from weapons or military strength, but from the mind of Dr. Mara Dillon, an eccentric scientist who had once studied energy systems under the banner of the United Earth Command. Dr. Dillon was an unlikely hero. Her background was in theoretical physics, not combat. Yet in the face of annihilation, she had come up with a radical hypothesis that could change the course of the war. Earth's magnetic fields, she proposed, held untapped potential, an energy signature that, when harnessed correctly, could disrupt the sophisticated technology the Zorath relied on. If they could use this energy against the invaders, they might stand a chance. At first, General Kessler was skeptical. The idea of utilizing Earth's magnetic properties seemed far-fetched, but Mara was relentless. She had already begun testing her theories, using the remnants of the few military satellites still functioning and the broken-down machinery in the bunker. What she discovered was startling. The Zorath's fleet, despite its advanced tech, appeared to be vulnerable to fluctuations in Earth's electromagnetic field. Their ships, seemingly invulnerable to Earth's weapons, were surprisingly susceptible to interference in this domain. Mara's calculations pointed to one thing: if they could build a device capable of generating an artificial magnetic pulse, it could cripple the alien ship's energy shields. It was an untested, dangerous proposition, but it was their only hope. The problem was, no one on Earth had the equipment to build something of that magnitude, and the Zorath were watching closely for any signs of rebellion. General Kessler, though hesitant, saw the potential in Mara's plan. With her leadership and Mara's ingenuity, they rallied a small team of engineers, hackers, and technicians from the remnants of the military. They began constructing the device in secret, working day and night, knowing that failure meant certain death. The stakes were higher than ever, and time was quickly running out. As the device neared completion, the Resistance faced another obstacle. The Zorath were becoming aware of the human resistance's growing strength. Alien patrols had begun hunting down survivors in the cities, and every moment spent on the device was one less moment they had to prepare for the inevitable retaliation. In a tense meeting, Kessler addressed her team, her voice resolute. "We're not just building a weapon, we're building the future. The Zorath think we're weak, that we'll crumble under their assault. But if this works, we'll send them a message they'll never forget." The device, a large, cumbersome piece of technology built from scavenged parts, was finally ready. It was nothing like the sleek, refined weapons of the Zorath, but its raw potential was undeniable. It could send out a pulse strong enough to overwhelm the alien fleet's shields for a critical few moments, enough to give humanity a fighting chance. The operation to test the weapon was a risky one. The Resistance, now more unified and organized than before, managed to secure a small Zorath outpost in an isolated region of the planet. They set up the device, hoping it would work as planned. As the moment of truth approached, every member of the Resistance held their breath. Would this fragile hope prove to be the turning point they so desperately needed, or would it be another failure in the long chain of human defeat? The countdown began, and as it hit 0, the device hummed to life, sending a shockwave of electromagnetic energy into the sky. The Zorath fleet in orbit shuddered, then, to the disbelief of everyone watching, their shields flickered and fell. For the first time, the invaders were vulnerable. Humanity had found a way to strike back. The tide had begun to shift. The pulse from the electromagnetic device had barely faded before the Resistance struck. General Abigail Kessler, knowing they had only minutes before the Zorath could regroup and counterattack, immediately launched a bold mission to exploit the vulnerability they had discovered. The plan was reckless, but it was the first real opportunity humanity had to hit back at the heart of the alien occupation. Kessler and her team of Resistance fighters, a mixture of military veterans and civilians who had become soldiers out of necessity, made their way toward a Zorath supply vessel that had been stationed just off the coast of what was once New York City. The ship was one of many logistical hubs used by the Zorath to distribute resources to their frontline troops. Disrupting it would send a ripple effect through their supply lines, weakening their forces on Earth and buying more time for the human resistance to organize. The Zorath were still reeling from the shockwave sent by the electromagnetic pulse, their ships struggling to reestablish their protective shields. The resistance fighters had no illusions that they could win a prolonged battle, but they knew the element of surprise could give them a fleeting advantage. In the dead of night, they infiltrated the Zorath vessel, slipping past alien patrols with precision and stealth. It wasn't long before they reached the core of the ship, where the Zorath were attempting to repair their systems. Their soldiers were efficient but disoriented, their once unshakable confidence faltering. Inside the vessel's central control room, Kessler and her team encountered a lone Zorath commander who seemed unaware of the full extent of the damage they had suffered. The alien was tall, its reptilian features a stark contrast to the humans around it, but there was an unmistakable arrogance in its eyes, a belief that the Zorath were invincible. That arrogance was about to cost them dearly. The resistance fighters launched their attack. With the help of the stolen alien technology, data gathered during previous raids, they quickly disabled the ship's remaining defenses and sealed off the escape routes. Kessler herself led the charge, her weapon blazing as she downed a dozen Zorath soldiers. The fight was brutal but short. With their shields still down, the Zorath were vulnerable. The humans overwhelmed them, and within moments, they had secured the vessel. Then came the unthinkable. Using the data they had gathered, Kessler ordered the ship's core to be overloaded. They triggered a cascade of energy throughout the ship, causing it to explode in a burst of brilliant destructive light. The Zorath vessel was destroyed, and the shockwave sent ripples through the remaining Zorath fleet, throwing them into disarray. This was no small victory. It was a message. Back on Earth, the Resistance celebrated cautiously. The victory was massive, but the price had been high. Many of Kessler's team had been injured or killed in the attack, and the Zorath were not known for forgiving such attacks lightly. The alien forces would soon retaliate with even more force. Still, the momentum was shifting. Humanity had proved they were capable of striking at the heart of the invaders, and the taste of success sparked something new within the survivors: hope. The world's population, long resigned to the fate of extinction, began to stir. The news of the strike spread like wildfire across the fractured globe, and for the first time since the invasion began, people began to believe that victory was possible. The resistance was no longer just a symbol of defiance. It was becoming a real, formidable force. Humanity had struck the first significant blow, but the Zorath would not take this loss lightly. The war was far from over. In fact, it was only just beginning. The victory over the Zorath supply vessel was a turning point, but it was just the beginning. The Resistance, emboldened by the unthinkable success, now knew that they could take the fight to the invaders. With the alien fleet reeling from the loss, the world's remaining militaries and scattered civilian factions began to organize, uniting under General Kessler's leadership. A sense of purpose spread like wildfire, and humanity's defiance hardened into a relentless drive to reclaim Earth. As the Resistance's numbers grew, so did their tactics. No longer operating in small pockets of insurgents, humanity began to form more coordinated strikes. General Kessler realized that Earth's strength lay not in matching the Zorath's firepower, but in their unpredictability. The Zorath were accustomed to dominating with sheer force, with order and precision. Humanity, on the other hand, fought like a storm, chaotic, relentless, and impossible to predict. They would strike from the shadows, disappear into the night, and return where the enemy least expected. In every part of the world, from the decimated ruins of Europe to the vast jungles of Africa, small resistance cells launched attacks against Zorath outposts. Some took out communications hubs, others targeted alien patrols, and some even raided Zorath-held cities for critical resources. It was a war of attrition, but each victory, no matter how small, boosted morale and sent shockwaves through the alien ranks. One such raid, led by Kessler herself, took place in the remains of the Zorath-controlled city of Paris. The Resistance had learned that a critical Zorath communications center was located within the city, one that coordinated all alien operations across Europe. Taking it out would sever their command and control, leaving their forces isolated and vulnerable. But Paris was heavily guarded, and the Zorath knew the city's strategic importance. Under the cover of night, Kessler's team slipped into the heart of the city, navigating through the rubble and ruins of what was once one of the world's most iconic capitals. The Zorath patrols were everywhere, and any misstep could lead to disaster. But humanity's soldiers were no longer just surviving, they had become hunters. They moved quickly, silently, cutting through alien patrols with precision. Kessler, ever the strategist, knew when to strike and when to vanish into the shadows. Finally, they reached the communications center. It was heavily fortified, surrounded by Zorath war machines and elite soldiers. But the Resistance had learned from their previous successes. This time, they had something new. Mara Dillon's research had borne fruit. A modified EMP device capable of disabling the Zorath's advanced technology at a range never before attempted. With the communication center as their target, the Resistance team planted the device at the heart of the alien fortress. As Kessler gave the signal, the device detonated. A wave of electromagnetic energy surged outward, sweeping across the Zorath's communications array and sending the entire facility into chaos. Alien soldiers dropped where they stood, their systems fried by the pulse. The Resistance fighters stormed the complex, wiping out the last of the Zorath defenders. The mission was a success, and within hours, the communication center was nothing more than a smoldering ruin. The ripple effect was immediate. The Zorath's coordination across Europe crumbled. Isolated and unable to communicate effectively, their forces faltered, losing their grip on key territories. Humanity's hit-and-run tactics had proven devastating. What had once seemed like impossible odds was now becoming a war of attrition that the Zorath were ill-prepared to fight. Back at the Resistance's new base of operations, General Kessler stood before a growing army of fighters, the pride of the human spirit shining through their eyes. The world had not given up. The reckoning tide was rising. It was only a matter of time before humanity would take back what was rightfully theirs. The Zorath had underestimated them, and that mistake would cost them everything. The Resistance was no longer fighting just to survive. They were fighting to win. And the Zorath, now feeling the sting of humanity's relentless force, would soon find out just how dangerous it was to face an enemy that never stopped fighting. The Zorath were reeling. For the first time since their invasion began, they were not the unstoppable force they had once believed themselves to be. Humanity had struck multiple blows to their supply lines, communication systems, and military outposts. The Resistance was growing in strength, using their knowledge of Earth's terrain and their unpredictable tactics to outmaneuver the alien invaders. It was clear now that Earth's survival wasn't just a fleeting hope, it was becoming a tangible reality. But the Zorath would not take this challenge lightly. In a desperate bid to maintain their dominance, they activated their deadliest weapon, the Valor, a bioengineered super soldier, a terrifying amalgamation of alien and human DNA. These super soldiers were the pinnacle of Zorath technology, designed to crush any resistance with brutal efficiency. Standing over 7 feet tall, their hulking bodies were enhanced with synthetic armor that bonded with their skin, rendering them nearly impervious to most conventional weapons. Their strength, speed, and regenerative abilities made them a nightmare for anyone unfortunate enough to cross their path. When the first wave of Fowler soldiers descended upon Earth, the Resistance was taken by surprise. Even with their success so far, humanity had never encountered anything like these abominations. The Exalor were relentless. Their enhanced physiology allowed them to cut through human defenses with ease. In one of the first encounters, a small resistance cell in Eastern Europe was wiped out in a matter of hours. The Exalor tore through fortified positions like paper, leaving nothing behind but carnage. General Kessler, aware of the growing threat, quickly organized a response. She knew that facing these monsters head-on would be suicidal. Humanity's only chance was to adapt, to use their ingenuity and resourcefulness to overcome the Zoreth's latest weapon. The Resistance's scientists and engineers, including Dr. Meridillon, worked tirelessly to develop a countermeasure. Drawing on the data gathered from previous raids, they focused on exploiting the weaknesses they had observed in the Zalur. Despite their extraordinary abilities, the Zalur were still bound by certain biological limitations. Their regenerative capabilities were not unlimited, and their reliance on technology meant they were vulnerable to specific electromagnetic frequencies that could disrupt their enhancements. Mara's team developed a specialized EMP device, one capable of emitting a pulse strong enough to disrupt the Zalur's internal systems. It was a long shot, but it was humanity's best hope. They would have to get close enough to the Zalur to deliver the strike, a dangerous proposition, but they had no other choice. Kessler led a small team on a covert mission to intercept a group of sailor soldiers that had been deployed to destroy a resistance outpost in the Canadian wilderness. The team moved swiftly through the dense forests, using the terrain to their advantage. Their target was a massive Zoreth transport vessel, which housed the Zalur soldiers and their reinforcements. When they finally reached the vessel, the Zalur were already unloading, their monstrous forms moving with terrifying speed and precision. The resistance fighters, hidden in the shadows, held their breath as the first Zalur soldier approached. The plan was simple: place the EMP devices at critical points in the transport ship, send a pulse strong enough to disrupt the Zalur's enhancements, and then retreat before the Zoreth realized what was happening. The operation was perilous. As the resistance soldiers moved in, one of their own accidentally triggered a silent alarm. The Zalur turned with unnatural speed, their eyes glowing with a predatory intensity. The battle that ensued was nothing short of brutal. The Zalur charged with the force of a freight train, tearing through resistance fighters with deadly precision. But the EMPs were deployed just in time. A deafening pulse filled the air, and the Zalur's bodies spasmed, their enhanced strength faltering as their regenerative abilities were temporarily shut down. The transport ship systems were thrown into disarray, giving the resistance just enough time to make their escape. The Zalur were neutralized, but at a heavy cost. Many of the resistance fighters had fallen, but the impact of this victory was far-reaching. The Zoreth's deadliest weapon had been temporarily defeated, and humanity had proven that no matter how powerful their enemies were, they could always find a way to strike back. The Resistance's success in disabling the Zalur soldiers marked a critical turning point in the war. The Zoreth had underestimated humanity's resilience and ingenuity, and now they would have to face the consequences. The reckoning was no longer just a hope, it was a reality. The tide had truly begun to turn. The Zoreth's reaction to the defeat of their prized sailor soldiers was swift and brutal. Within days of the Resistance's victory in the Canadian wilderness, the alien forces began to consolidate their remaining power. Their response was not just militaristic, it was psychological. The Zoreth began their campaign of terror, launching devastating orbital bombardments on civilian centers across the globe. Entire cities were reduced to ash, and the survivors were left to face an even harsher reality. The Zoreth would not rest until every last vestige of humanity was eradicated. Despite the overwhelming odds, the human resistance refused to yield. General Kessler, more determined than ever, rallied her forces. The victories they had achieved so far were merely the beginning. They had learned too much from their failures and successes. Humanity now had a fighting chance, a chance to reclaim their planet and to push the Zoreth back into the dark void from which they had come. In the midst of the chaos, a new target emerged. Intelligence reports indicated that the Zoreth were building something massive, something that would ensure their absolute domination of Earth. The Zoreth Nexus, an enormous space station, was under construction in orbit, a base of operations that would allow them to control every human activity on Earth with terrifying precision. If the Nexus became operational, it would be the final step in their conquest, and any hope of resistance would be crushed for good. This would be humanity's most dangerous mission yet. General Kessler and Mara Dillon knew that a direct assault on the Nexus was suicidal. But there was a way, one last gambit. The Resistance had gathered enough intelligence to know that the Nexus, while heavily guarded, had a critical weak point, its power core. The core, if destroyed, would cause the station to collapse in on itself, taking with it the Zorath's ability to coordinate their invasion. Without the Nexus, their forces would be left fractured and vulnerable. To accomplish this, the Resistance would have to infiltrate the station, sabotage the core, and escape before the Zorath realized what had happened. But time was running out. The Zorath were ramping up their efforts, sending more and more Azalar soldiers to Earth, and the orbital bombardments were becoming increasingly severe. The Resistance had to act fast, and they had to be smart. Kessler assembled her most trusted team, a mix of veterans who had survived the most brutal battles and young recruits who had never known anything but war. Together, they would infiltrate the Zorath Nexus and deal a blow to the invaders that would shake their resolve to the core. As the team prepared for the mission, there was a somber air among the Resistance fighters. The stakes were higher than ever, and many knew that not all of them would make it back. But the mission was their best hope, not just for survival, but for victory. If the Nexus fell, the Zorath's grip on Earth would loosen, and the Resistance could turn the tide permanently. The journey to the Nexus was perilous, requiring a covert insertion into the heart of Zorath-controlled space. The Resistance had secured a stolen Zorath shuttle, modified to evade detection, and Kessler's team was ready to launch their final assault. The Zorath, still reeling from the loss of their Azalar soldiers, were on high alert, but the element of surprise remained their greatest weapon. As the shuttle broke through the atmosphere and made its way toward the looming presence of the Nexus, the team knew that this was their moment. Their plan was in motion, and they had to trust each other and the ingenuity that had gotten them this far to see it through. They had come a long way since the first days of the invasion. Humanity was no longer just fighting for survival, they were fighting to win, and they had become a force that the Zorath could no longer ignore. This mission would determine everything. The final act of the reckoning tide had begun. The Zorath Nexus loomed ahead, an immense structure floating like a dark monolith in space. Its sheer size and complexity were a testament to the Zorath's technological prowess, a weapon designed to crush the last remnants of humanity's resistance. General Kessler's team, hidden inside a stolen Zorath shuttle, approached the station under the cover of deep space. The shuttle's cloaking technology allowed them to avoid detection for now, but the window of safety was narrowing. Once they reached the Nexus, the mission would become a race against time. Inside the shuttle, tension hung thick in the air. Each member of the team knew the risks. This would be a one-way mission for many of them. The shuttle would not return to Earth. There was no time to come back. The destruction of the Zorath Nexus was their only hope. If they failed, humanity's resistance would be crushed under the full weight of the Zorath's vengeance. Kessler checked the countdown on her wrist device. They had only hours before the Nexus came fully online, and the Zorath would realize their presence. They couldn't afford a single misstep. The shuttle's pilot, a seasoned veteran named Lieutenant Connor Blackwood, kept his focus on the station's perimeter as they approached, guiding them toward a gap in the Nexus's defensive shields, an entry point they had identified in their intel, vulnerable for only a brief moment. "We're almost there," Blackwood said, his voice steady, though the tension was palpable. Kessler nodded. "Once we're inside, Mara and I will head to the core. The rest of you, secure the station's comms room. We need to cut off their ability to communicate once the core is disabled." Mara Dillon, the Resistance's lead scientist, adjusted the device strapped to her back, a makeshift EMP generator designed to disable the Nexus's power core. It was a crude device, but it was humanity's best shot. Mara had spent countless sleepless nights refining it, testing it with salvaged Zorath technology. Now, all that mattered was whether it would work. "Remember," Kessler continued, addressing the team, "we get in, we do our job, and we get out. No heroics. This mission is about survival. Do your part, and we'll finish this." The shuttle neared the Nexus, the massive station dwarfing them in size as it came into full view. It was like a colossal dark city orbiting Earth, sprawling, foreboding, and deadly. The sheer scale of it was intimidating, but Kessler pushed the thought aside. Fear would not help them now. They entered the station through a narrow docking bay, hidden within a sector that was not as heavily patrolled. The shuttle settled into place with a soft hum. The team disembarked quickly, weapons drawn, moving in silent formation. The space around them was quiet, eerily so, as if the Nexus itself was waiting for them. Mara, her heart racing, felt a mixture of excitement and dread. She had spent years studying alien technology, but nothing could have prepared her for this. This was their one chance to end the war. They had to succeed, or Earth's last hope would disappear forever. Kessler led the team down a long, dimly lit corridor where the walls seemed to pulse with an unnatural energy. They reached the access point to the core room without incident, but as they prepared to enter, the silence was shattered by a harsh, mechanical voice booming through the speakers. "Intruders detected. Security measures activated." The Nexus had detected them. Without warning, the lights in the hallway flickered, and armored Zorath soldiers appeared from hidden doorways. The resistance team opened fire, their weapons blazing, but the Zorath soldiers were swift and relentless. Despite their advanced armor, the humans pressed forward, overwhelming them with sheer determination and firepower. Kessler's heart pounded in her chest as she signaled for Mara to push forward. "Go," she shouted. Mara sprinted ahead, slipping past the firefight as her team covered her. She reached the core room's door, a massive blast shield reinforced with Zorath-grade security, and quickly set to work with the access codes they had stolen during a previous raid. The door hissed open. Inside, the station's power core thrummed with energy, a towering structure of alien technology. Mara's eyes widened as she began the process of activating the EMP device, her hands shaking with adrenaline. The countdown had begun. Time was running out. Outside, the battle raged on. The final confrontation had begun, and as the EMP device powered up, Mara knew that this moment would determine the fate of Earth. Success meant victory, failure meant extinction. The reckoning tide was reaching its climax. The EMP device hummed to life, its energy pulse gathering within the confines of the Nexus core room. Outside, the battle was escalating, with the resistance fighting tooth and nail against the overwhelming Zorath forces. Every second that ticked by felt like an eternity as General Kessler and her team held their ground, giving Mara Dillon the time she desperately needed. The fate of humanity was teetering on the edge of a blade. Mara's hands moved swiftly, her heart racing as she calibrated the final settings on the EMP device. The core was close to reaching full power, and if she didn't act fast, the Zorath would notice the disruption and trigger countermeasures that could annihilate the entire team. Sweat beaded on her forehead as she input the last sequence. Her fingers trembled, but she steadied them, determined to see this through. The door to the core room shuddered as a fresh wave of Zorath soldiers poured in, their alien armor gleaming in the dim light. Kessler and the team opened fire, the crackle of gunshots filling the room as they pushed forward. The air was thick with the smell of burnt ozone, the clash of human resistance against the alien threat reaching a fever pitch. "Mara, hurry!" Kessler yelled, her voice raw with urgency. Mara's mind was a blur of calculations, her eyes flicking between the EMP's readout and the approaching Zorath forces. They were almost there. The countdown was at 30 seconds. A Zorath soldier lunged at Kessler, his armored fist aimed at her chest, but she was faster. In a single brutal move, she sidestepped and drove her blade through the soldier's exposed neck. His body crumpled, but more followed. The air was thick with the sounds of combat, the sharp whine of alien weaponry, and the rhythmic thud of boots on the station's metal floors. "Mara," Kessler shouted again, her voice strained with effort. "We don't have much time." The EMP device beeped ominously. 20 seconds. Mara's breath caught in her throat as she activated the final sequence. She backed away, clutching her weapon as the device powered up, a brilliant blue light filling the room. The hum grew louder, vibrating through her chest. This was it. The EMP pulse would overload the Zorath Nexus's power core, sending shockwaves through the entire station. The Zorath soldiers surged forward, but it was too late. The EMP pulse unleashed, and the entire Nexus seemed to shake with the force of the explosion. The core went dark, its internal systems collapsing in a wave of cascading failure. Lights flickered, the station groaning under the strain, as the Zorath forces lost all communication and control. The once imposing structure was now a crippled shell. The Zorath soldiers were momentarily stunned, their systems offline. In the chaos, Kessler and her team pushed forward, cutting through the remaining resistance. But the station was collapsing. The power surge had triggered a catastrophic failure, and soon the Nexus would be nothing more than a field of floating debris. "Mara, move." Kessler barked, her eyes scanning the collapsing station. "We need to get out, now." Mara nodded, already moving toward the exit. The team raced through the corridors, the walls shaking as the station's systems failed. The emergency alarms blared, and the artificial gravity flickered, throwing them off balance as they sprinted toward their shuttle. They reached the shuttle bay just as the first explosions rocked the Nexus. The Zorath's reinforcements were already responding, but the EMP had done its job. The Nexus was crippled, its once impenetrable systems brought to their knees. Kessler and the remaining resistance fighters boarded the shuttle, their breath coming in sharp gasps. The engines roared to life as they punched through the station's debris field. The Zorath forces were too disoriented to mount a coherent defense, and the resistance fighters knew they had only narrowly escaped. As the shuttle broke free from the wreckage of the Nexus, Kessler looked out the viewport. The station was disintegrating, pieces of it scattered across the dark expanse of space. The Zorath's grip on Earth had been shattered. Humanity had struck the final blow. But the war was not over yet. The reckoning tide had begun, and humanity's defiance had proven that no force, no matter how powerful, could extinguish the will to survive. With the Nexus destroyed and the Zorath scattered, the Resistance was poised to strike again. The Earth, battered and scared, was no longer a conquered world. It was a battlefield where the last hope for freedom had risen, relentless, unstoppable, and unbroken. The fight was far from over, but humanity had found its strength. The reckoning tide had come, and Earth's champions were ready to finish what they had started.